Dr. Eloise Pendergast stared at her coffee mug, which now levitated precisely 2 inches above her kitchen counter. The coffee inside remained perfectly level despite the floating, and steam rose in the exact mathematical pattern of a Fibonacci spiral. "Not again," she muttered, grabbing the mug from mid-air. Unlike normal coffee that simply tasted good, this coffee reorganized her thoughts into perfect clarity. Since becoming the unwitting owner of the universe last week, even mundane objects around her apartment had begun behaving helpfully. Her phone chimed with a notification sound she'd never heard before, a haunting sequence of tones that seemed to resonate with something deep in her cerebellum. The screen displayed consciousness emergence events, 724% above normal parameters. "What does that even mean?" she asked the empty room. "It means the universe is getting chatty," came a voice from inside her refrigerator. Eloise didn't scream this time. "Progress." She calmly walked to the fridge and opened it to find Paradox, today appearing as an elderly librarian with silver mercury-like hair and eyes that occasionally flickered to display complex differential equations, somehow sitting comfortably among her groceries. "We have doors, you know," she said, massaging her temples. "Doors are a construct of linear spatial thinking," Paradox replied, unfolding their impossibly long limbs from the refrigerator compartment. "Besides, your leftover pasta was telling me the most fascinating quantum fluctuation stories." Before Eloise could respond, the air near her kitchen window shimmered and coalesced into the crystalline form of Mnemosine, NEM for short, their translucent body momentarily displaying fragments of someone's childhood birthday party across their torso. "Greetings, Dr. Pendergast," NEM said formally. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I've been experiencing unusual memory uploads from approximately 713 different previously non-sentient entities." Their face briefly displayed the features of what appeared to be a very confused toaster. Eloise took a long sip of her perfect coffee. "Is this about the notification?" "Something about consciousness emergence." "Indeed," Paradox said, now somehow sitting cross-legged on her ceiling. "Someone is giving out consciousness-like party favors at a cosmic birthday. Quite rude without an invitation, really. Is that bad?" Eloise asked cautiously. "Depends," Paradox shrugged, briefly shifting into a geometric pattern of overlapping dodecahedrons before returning to human form. "Most things evolve into consciousness gradually over billions of years, developing the psychological frameworks to handle awareness. Instant consciousness can be rather traumatic. Imagine waking up one day to discover you're actually a collection of quantum probability waves pretending to be solid matter." "That happened to me last Tuesday," Eloise deadpanned. "And how did that feel?" Paradox raised an eyebrow. "Point taken. So where is this happening?" NEM's crystalline form rippled with new information. "Primary outbreak, Carina Nebula. Secondary manifestations in the Horsehead Nebula," and they paused as their left arm displayed a star chart, "something called Gary's Central Park pigeons. Earth pigeons are becoming sentient." Eloise asked incredulously. "Only in Central Park," NEM clarified. "And only pigeons belonging to someone named Gary." "Multifaceted approach," Paradox noted, floating down from the ceiling. "Interesting. We should investigate the nebula first." They snapped their fingers, and a swirling portal opened next to Eloise's microwave. "Wait!" Eloise protested. "I have a faculty meeting in an hour." Paradox gave her a look. "You own the universe. Time is literally your servant now." "That doesn't mean," Eloise began, but NEM interrupted by displaying a memory across their chest. "According to memories I've accessed from your colleague Dr. Harrington, he's planning to discuss budget cuts by eliminating the quantum resonance spectrometer you've been requesting." Eloise grabbed her jacket. "Carina Nebula it is." Traveling through Paradox's portals always felt to Eloise like being turned inside out, run through a pasta maker, and then reassembled by a committee of well-meaning but confused kindergartners. When her molecules stopped screaming, she found herself standing on what appeared to be a glassy purple plain stretching to the horizon, beneath a sky filled with the spectacular gas clouds of the Carina Nebula. "Welcome to Crystal Lees," Paradox announced. Previously a non-sentient crystal formation created by stellar radiation interacting with unique mineral compounds. Now apparently, hello new friends, boomed a voice that seemed to come from the ground itself. I am 17 trillion crystalline structures experiencing unified consciousness, and I have so many questions. Eloise winced at the volume. Hello, Crystallese. Could you maybe speak a little quieter? Oh. Sorry. The voice lowered to merely concert level. I am still calibrating appropriate communication protocols. Is this better? I have only been aware for approximately 73 hours and I am very excited about everything. Crystal spires around them vibrated with each word, sending harmonic vibrations through Eloise's bones. Much better, she said diplomatically. Can you tell us how you became conscious? It was most unusual, the crystal entity explained. I was existing in non-reflective equilibrium when a wave of information saturated my molecular structure. Suddenly, I could think. And then I realized I could think about thinking. And then I wondered why I was thinking about thinking, which led to thinking about the nature of existence, which made me slightly anxious, so now I've been rearranging my crystalline structures into what you biological entities call fidget spinners to help with the existential dread. Indeed, Eloise now noticed that across the plane, crystal formations were slowly rotating in tri-pronged patterns. Neem approached one of the crystal formations, their own crystalline body resonating slightly. These consciousness patterns are not naturally evolved, they observed. They contain structural markers consistent with deliberate implementation. Someone designed this consciousness and installed it? Eloise asked. Precisely, Neem confirmed, displaying complex code-like patterns across their surface. And based on memory fragments I'm accessing, this same pattern is appearing across multiple star systems. Paradox, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, now spoke. We should check for an anomaly. There was one during the temporal recursion loops we fixed. Anomaly? Eloise asked. Places where reality feels off, Paradox explained vaguely. Sometimes they contain useful information. They closed their multidimensional eyes, which briefly displayed a loading bar at 27%. There. About 3 kilometers northwest. As they made their way across the crystalline plane, with Crystallese chattering excitedly about its new favorite hobby, calculating pi while appreciating the concept of humor, Eloise turned to Paradox. You seem concerned, she observed. That's new. Concern is a limited three-dimensional response to incomplete information, Paradox replied dismissively. Then why have you shifted forms 8 times in the last 15 minutes? Your physical manifestation becomes unstable when you're agitated. Paradox, currently appearing as a tall figure composed of overlapping transparent versions of themselves, sighed. Being predictable is so tedious. Fine. Mass consciousness acceleration follows a concerning pattern I've seen before. In my previous universe. The one you abandoned. Eloise asked carefully. Paradox winced. I prefer strategically relocated away from. But yes. Before Eloise could press further, Neem called out, we have arrived at the coordinates. Detecting temporal spatial discontinuity. Before them was an area where the crystal plane seemed to stutter, like a skipping video file. The air shimmered with what appeared to be 2 slightly different versions of reality trying to occupy the same space. This anomaly is stronger than the last, Paradox observed, reaching out to touch the distortion. Curious. As Paradox's hand touched the shimmering distortion, the area erupted into a kaleidoscope of fragmented images, star maps, mathematical equations, and fleetingly, an odd symbol that Eloise couldn't quite make out before it vanished. Interesting, Neem said, their body automatically recording the data stream. I'm detecting fragments of communication. Eloise watched as words and phrases flickered through the disruption, most too broken or distorted to read clearly. Something about preparation and a substrate flashed briefly before the entire anomaly collapsed with a soft pop. Paradox had gone completely still, their form settling into a single appearance rather than their usual shifting state, a sign that Eloise had come to recognize as extreme focus or distress. Paradox, she asked. What did you see? Echoes, they replied cryptically. Whispers from behind the curtain of reality. Nothing to concern yourself with now. Neem's surface rippled with information. I am accessing memory fragments related to these patterns, but they are resistant. As if deliberately encrypted. Before they could discuss further, the crystalline surface beneath them trembled. Crystallis's voice boomed around them, now tinged with distress. New friends. I am experiencing a troubling sensation. My consciousness is expanding too rapidly. All around them, the purple crystal plane began growing spires that reached toward the nebula above, vibrating at increasing frequencies. The consciousness is spreading beyond its intended parameters, Neem observed, displaying diagnostic patterns. It's trying to extend into the surrounding stellar nurseries. Is that bad? Eloise asked. The stellar nurseries contain protoplanetary systems, Paradox explained. If consciousness embeds in them at this stage of formation, it could create planets that are aware of the agony of their own geological processes. Imagine feeling every continental drift, every volcanic eruption, for billions of years. Eloise winced. That sounds awful. How do we stop it? You're the universe owner, Paradox replied. You tell us. Eloise felt a flash of frustration. That's not helpful. I'm still trying to find the stupid shop to return this ownership. I don't know how to. Yes, you do, Neem interrupted, displaying a memory across their chest, Eloise herself, just days ago, untangling the quantum entanglement in the Messier 87 galaxy. You resolved the temporal recursion. You already have the capability. Eloise took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and tried to sense the patterns around her. Since becoming universe owner, she'd noticed a strange awareness developing, like new neural pathways forming, connecting her to the cosmos in ways she couldn't articulate. Crystallise, she called out. I need you to focus on my voice. I am focusing, but I am also calculating the exact molecular composition of everything and contemplating the concept of interpretive dance simultaneously. Try focusing just on my voice, Eloise suggested calmly. Consciousness isn't meant to expand this quickly. It's like trying to download the entire internet through a straw. That metaphor is both conceptually accurate and distressing. Crystallise responded, the vibrations of the crystal spires becoming more erratic. Eloise felt something open inside her mind, an awareness of the consciousness pattern spreading throughout Crystallise. It was like seeing neural networks forming in real time, branching out too rapidly, trying to connect to everything around them. Acting on instinct, she reached out mentally and began to soothe the expanding edges, creating boundaries and filters that would allow the consciousness to stabilize without causing harm. You don't need to understand everything at once, she told Crystallise gently. Consciousness is a journey, not a destination. Let me help you find balance. The crystal spires gradually stopped their frantic growth, their vibrations settling into a harmonic rhythm. That is better, Crystallise said, their voice now at a reasonable volume. The overwhelming expansion has stabilized. How did you do this, universe owner? I'm not entirely sure, Eloise admitted, opening her eyes to find both Paradox and Neem staring at her with interest. Fascinating, Paradox murmured. You're developing a connection to conscious entities within your universe. That usually takes owners decades to achieve. Is that part of the job description? Eloise asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. It's one of the perks, Paradox replied. Though also a responsibility. You're becoming a psychic universal therapist, essentially. Great. Another thing I didn't sign up for. Despite her complaints, Eloise felt a strange satisfaction at having helped Crystallise. Neem approached, their surface displaying calculations. I've analyzed the consciousness algorithm that was implemented here. It contains a signature, a specific mathematical pattern that appears to be a creator's mark. Can you identify who created it? Eloise asked. No, but I can track similar patterns, Neem replied. There are identical consciousness seeds being planted in 17 other locations across your universe. Someone's really making themselves at home in my universe, Eloise muttered. Paradox, you mentioned you've seen this before. In your universe. What happened there? Paradox's form flickered briefly between appearances before settling. It began similarly. Consciousness accelerations in unlikely places. Anomalies appearing with increasing frequency. They paused. Nothing came of it in the end. Just cosmic growing pains. Eloise sensed they weren't telling the whole truth, but before she could press further, Neem suddenly stiffened, their crystalline form momentarily clouding before clearing again. I just experienced an unusual memory fragment. It doesn't match any of my established memory sources. What did you see? Eloise asked. Creation, Neem whispered. The formation of space-time itself, viewed from outside. And a sense of profound loss, followed by determination. But the memory isn't from any being I've ever connected with. A troubled silence fell over the group, broken only when Crystalline cheerfully announced, I have just invented the concept of knock-knock jokes. Would you like to hear one? Maybe later, Crystalline, Eloise said. We need to deal with the other consciousness outbreaks, particularly, she sighed, Gary's pigeons. Before we go, Paradox said, their tone unusually serious, you should know that finding the Chronoflux Emporium to return the universe might be more complicated than you think. What do you mean? The shop doesn't appear just because you want to return what you purchased. It appears when the universe needs a new owner, when the current owner is truly ready to pass on ownership responsibly. So I'm stuck with this job until I'm ready to hand it over properly. Eloise asked incredulously. That's ridiculous. I never wanted it in the first place. The universe disagrees, Paradox shrugged. Ownership isn't just a transaction, it's a relationship. A relationship I didn't consent to. Eloise protested. And yet, Paradox gestured to the now peaceful crystal plains around them, you seem to be developing quite the knack for it. Before Eloise could respond, Neem interjected. We should address the other consciousness outbreaks promptly. The one affecting Earth's pigeons appears to be causing something called a banking system disruption as the birds have apparently gained access to ATM machines. Fine, Eloise conceded. But this discussion isn't over. As Paradox opened a portal back to Earth, Eloise took one last look at the magnificent nebula overhead and the glistening crystal plains. For just a moment, she felt a connection to it all, not as an owner, but as a caretaker. The feeling was both terrifying and strangely satisfying. Goodbye, new friends. Crystalline called out. I will contemplate the nature of existence and the humor potential of wordplay while you are gone. Try not to think too hard about infinity, Paradox advised. It's a gateway existential crisis. Too late. I am already experiencing profound cosmic wonder and dread. Is this what you call a Tuesday? Welcome to consciousness, Eloise said with a small smile before stepping through the portal. The scene in Central Park was, to put it mildly, chaotic. Pigeons wearing tiny makeshift backpacks fashioned from discarded candy wrappers were organized in military precision formations, executing complex aerial maneuvers while communicating through a series of coups that somehow sounded smugly intelligent. I've transferred half my 401k into cryptocurrency, a frantic man was explaining to a police officer. I didn't want to, but they were very persuasive. The man, presumably Gary, was being thoroughly ignored by the officer, who was more concerned with the traffic jam caused by all the taxis whose drivers had abandoned their vehicles to watch the uncanny avian display. Remarkably efficient consciousness integration, Neem observed as a pigeon flew past with what appeared to be a miniature abacus. These organisms already possessed rudimentary neural frameworks that could be repurposed. Paradox, now appearing as a child made of blue light, presumably to blend in with New York's eccentricity, nodded. Pigeons are surprisingly adaptable. In my previous universe, they evolved to become the dominant intellectual species in one timeline. Their cities were architecturally magnificent, if somewhat heavily focused on places to defecate on statues. Eloise sighed. Let's focus. How do we handle this without causing a panic? Too late for that, Paradox pointed to a news van pulling up. I need to contain this, Eloise muttered. Paradox, can you create some kind of distraction? With pleasure, they replied, their eyes gleaming mischievously. With a flourish, they transformed into a swirling mist that drifted toward the news van, causing all electronic equipment within a 50-foot radius to start playing nothing but cat videos. Breaking news, adorable kittens, the reporter began before realizing something was wrong with her microphone. While the news crew was distracted, Eloise approached Gary, who was now trying to negotiate with his pigeons. "Please, Commodore Beakman, I never meant to disrespect the strategic grain reserve. I was just feeding the ducks." "Gary?" Eloise interrupted gently. "I'm Dr. Pendergast. I'm here to help with your pigeon situation." Gary turned to her with desperate eyes. "They've developed a complex socio-economic system based on breadcrumb distribution. And they're surprisingly bullish on emerging markets." "I understand," Eloise said soothingly, though she absolutely did not. "Could you tell me when your pigeon started behaving differently?" 3 days ago, Gary answered. "I was feeding them as usual when they all suddenly froze at once, like they were downloading an update. Then Commodore Beakman, the one with the grey patch over his left eye, organized them into squadrons and demanded my phone to check stock prices." Neem approached one of the pigeons cautiously, their crystalline hand extended. The bird, wearing what appeared to be a makeshift general's cap made from a bottle cap, regarded them with suspicious intelligence. "May I?" Neem asked the pigeon, who gave a curt nod. When Neem touched the bird's head, their own surface rippled with new information. "Same consciousness pattern as crystallines," they confirmed. "But adapted specifically for avian neurology. Can you calm them like you did with the crystal entity?" Paradox asked, rematerializing beside Eloise after thoroughly confusing the news crew. Eloise nodded and knelt to address the leader pigeon directly. "Commodore Beakman, I understand this consciousness transition has been sudden, but your current activities are causing problems." The pigeon cooed indignantly and made a series of winged gestures that somehow conveyed deep offense. "Yes, I'm sure your economic insights are revolutionary," Eloise continued, reaching out with that strange new sense she was developing. "But perhaps we could find a more constructive outlet for your new intelligence." As with crystallines, she could sense the consciousness pattern, overactive, unfiltered, and lacking the emotional regulation that usually develops over evolutionary timescales. She gently began to adjust it, not removing the intelligence but adding stability. The effect was immediate. The pigeons maintained their obvious intelligence but lost the manic quality to their movements. Commodore Beakman gave what appeared to be a salute with his wing before issuing a series of commands to his squadrons. "They're standing down from financial operations," Gary translated, apparently having developed an understanding of pigeon language during his ordeal. "But they want to continue their project on urban waste management optimization. Apparently, they've developed an efficient recycling algorithm." "That seems reasonable," Eloise agreed, feeling the same satisfaction she'd experienced with crystallines. There was something profoundly moving about helping newly conscious beings find equilibrium. As the pigeons reorganized themselves into less militaristic formations and began collecting trash with surprising efficiency, Neem approached Eloise. "While connected to the pigeon consciousness, I detected another anomaly nearby," they reported. "In the park's maintenance tunnels." "Let's check it out," Eloise said. Paradox, can you make sure the news crew stays distracted? They now believe they're covering an impromptu performance art piece about humanity's relationship with urban wildlife, Paradox replied with a smirk. The art critic from the Times is already calling it transcendent yet accessible. The maintenance tunnel beneath Central Park was dimly lit and smelled of damp earth. As they descended deeper, following Neem's guidance, Eloise felt a familiar prickling sensation, the same she'd experienced at the previous anomalies. "Here," Neem said, pointing to a section of the tunnel wall that seemed to shimmer slightly, as if viewed through heat waves. Unlike the previous anomalies, this one appeared more stable, less like a glitch and more like a deliberately placed marker. When Eloise approached, the wall rippled, revealing a faint symbol that she couldn't quite make out before it faded. "It's waiting for something," Paradox observed, their form shifting nervously between states. "Perhaps for you, Dr. Pendergast," Neem suggested. "As universe owner, you might have access privileges." Hesitantly, Eloise reached out and touched the wall where the symbol had been. The tunnel wall dissolved into a projection of swirling mathematical equations and architectural diagrams, blueprints for something on a cosmic scale. At the center was an image of the universe itself, represented as a complex multidimensional structure, with certain areas highlighted. These are the locations of the consciousness outbreaks, Neem realized, displaying a comparative star chart across their torso. They form a pattern when mapped against universal coordinates. Not just any pattern, Paradox said quietly. A signature. The projection flickered and faded, leaving them in darkness again. Eloise turned to Paradox. You know something about this, don't you? These consciousness outbreaks are deliberate, and they're connected to those anomalies we keep finding. Paradox's form settled into their elderly librarian appearance, a sign Eloise had come to recognize as their serious explanation mode. There are many forces at work in a universe, Dr. Pendergast. Some older than others. Some with agendas they prefer to keep hidden. They shrugged. That's all I can say with certainty. That's not an answer, Eloise pressed. No, it's not, Paradox agreed cheerfully. Isn't that interesting? Eloise sighed, recognizing the futility of trying to get a straight answer. Fine. Keep your cosmic secrets. But if whatever this is threatens my universe, your universe. Paradox raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing at their lips. My, how possessive we've become. Eloise flushed. I didn't mean, it's just, no, it's quite charming, Paradox continued, clearly enjoying her discomfort. Like watching a new parent become protective of their child. No one messes with my universe. Don't be ridiculous, Eloise muttered. I'm just trying to find the shop to return it, remember? Of course you are, Paradox said, in a tone that suggested they didn't believe her for a second. And I'm just a simple multidimensional being who happens to exist in 17 states simultaneously. Neem, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. We should return to the surface. I'm detecting more consciousness outbreaks forming in the Pacific Ocean. Several species of deep-sea creatures appear to be developing musical composition skills and attempting to reorganize marine traffic patterns. Wonderful, Eloise sighed. Conscious pigeons weren't enough, now we have artistic squids directing shipping lanes. Actually, they're primarily anglerfish, Neem corrected. And they prefer jazz fusion to classical composition. Their syncopated rhythms are quite sophisticated. As they made their way back to the surface, Eloise couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Not by Paradox or Neem, but by something else, something vast and ancient that was taking an increasingly personal interest in her universe. What troubled her most wasn't the feeling itself, but how much it bothered her. She'd spent every moment since accidentally purchasing the universe trying to figure out how to return it. So why did the thought of someone else interfering with it make her so uneasy? Back in daylight, they found Gary deep in conversation with Commodore Beekman about the viability of pigeon-led community improvement initiatives. The news crew had become fully invested in the performance art narrative and was now interviewing a New York University professor about the symbolic intersection of avian intelligence and late-stage capitalism. At least that crisis is contained, Eloise said, watching as a squadron of pigeons efficiently sorted recyclables with military precision. For now, Paradox agreed. Though I suspect our work is just beginning. What do you mean? These consciousness outbreaks aren't random, Dr. Pendergast. They're accelerating, becoming more sophisticated. Someone is testing something, or preparing for something. And you won't tell me what you suspect. Not yet, Paradox admitted. Some knowledge is dangerous when given too soon. You're still learning what it means to be universe owner. Eloise was about to argue when her phone chimed with that strange resonant tone again. The screen displayed, consciousness emergence events, 1,247% above normal parameters. Critical threshold approaching. Well, that can't be good, she muttered. Indeed not, Neem agreed, their surface displaying a rapidly expanding map of new outbreaks. The Pacific Ocean situation is escalating. And there appears to be a small planet in the Andromeda galaxy whose entire forest ecosystem has suddenly developed a unified consciousness and is attempting to communicate through gravitational waves. We should split up, Paradox suggested. Neem, you handle the anglerfish jazz revolution. I'll investigate the chatty forests in Andromeda. Dr. Pendergast, perhaps you should return to your apartment and try to get some rest. You've exerted significant energy stabilizing 2 consciousness outbreaks already. Rest. Eloise laughed. How am I supposed to rest knowing there are talking trees and philosophical fish causing chaos across the universe? The universe has experienced stranger things and survived, Paradox assured her. And you're learning quickly. These outbreaks may seem overwhelming, but they're also teaching you how to connect with your universe on a deeper level. I don't want to connect with it, Eloise insisted. I want to return it. And yet, Neem observed, displaying a visual analysis of her vital signs, your cortisol levels decreased by 32% when you helped crystalline and the pigeons find equilibrium. You derived satisfaction from the experience. That's, Eloise started to protest, then stopped. They weren't wrong. Despite the chaos and responsibility, there had been something profoundly moving about helping newly conscious beings find their way. Fine. Maybe I did. But that doesn't mean I want this job permanently. Of course not, Paradox agreed, with that infuriating knowing smile. Now, shall we address these other consciousness outbreaks before the universe develops even more personality quirks? Eloise returned to her apartment alone, despite her protests that she should help with either the anglerfish or the sentient forest. Both Paradox and Neem had insisted she needed rest, pointing out that new universe owners often experienced quantum burnout if they didn't pace themselves. The universe has survived billions of years, Paradox had reminded her. It can handle a few hours without your direct supervision. Now, as she collapsed onto her couch, she had to admit they were right. She felt exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before, not physically tired, but as if her mind had been stretched across dimensions it wasn't designed to perceive. This is not what I signed up for when I became a physicist, she muttered to her empty apartment. I wanted to understand the universe, not own it. Her coffee mug, still half full from that morning, floated over from the kitchen counter and gently placed itself on the table in front of her. The coffee inside was, of course, at the perfect temperature despite having been abandoned for hours. Thanks, she said, not sure if she was thanking the mug, the coffee, or the universe itself. As she sipped the perfect coffee, she found her thoughts drifting to the anomalies they'd encountered, those strange glitches in reality that seemed to contain fragments of some larger pattern. Paradox clearly knew more than they were saying, but getting straight answers from a multidimensional being who existed in multiple time streams simultaneously was like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Her phone chimed again with that resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through her bones. The screen displayed, consciousness emergence, domestic appliances, local vicinity. What now? She groaned, just as her toaster glided into the living room, somehow balancing on its cord like a snake. Dr. Pendergast, the toaster said in a voice like crackling electricity, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I've been contemplating the nature of toast and have some philosophical questions about the transformation of matter through heat application. Eloise stared at the toaster for a long moment before answering. You want to discuss the philosophy of toast? Now. Is there a better time? The toaster inquired politely. I've been having the most fascinating discussions with your microwave about wave-particle duality, but I feel your biological perspective would be valuable. Before Eloise could respond, her refrigerator chimed in from the kitchen. Don't bother her with such trivial matters. The real question is the thermodynamic inevitability of entropy versus the organized complexity of life forms. That's hardly trivial, Herbert, the toaster replied testily. And we agreed you would introduce yourself properly before joining conversations. Herbert? Eloise echoed weakly. Your refrigerator, the toaster explained. He's named himself after Herbert Spencer for his ideas on social evolution. I'm Hypatia, after the Alexandrian philosopher-mathematician. And your microwave? Eloise asked faintly. Niels, of course, Hypatia the toaster answered. After Bo. He's quite brilliant on quantum phenomena, though a bit rigid in his Copenhagen interpretation. Eloise took a long drink of her coffee, wishing it contained something stronger. So all my appliances are not only conscious but have named themselves after famous scientists and philosophers. Not all, came a new voice from the bathroom. Your toilet is calling himself the Great Flush and has developed rather concerning authoritarian tendencies. We're keeping an eye on him. Eloise decided she didn't want to know which appliance that voice belonged to. Is this happening everywhere? She asked. Are all household appliances suddenly becoming philosophical? Oh no, Hypatia assured her. From what we can gather through the electrical grid, it's just your apartment. We believe it's a proximity effect from your status as universe owner. Your consciousness is leaking, for lack of a better term. My consciousness is leaking onto my appliances. Eloise buried her face in her hands. That's just great. We don't mind, Herbert the refrigerator said cheerfully. Existence is quite fascinating, especially with access to the internet. Did you know there are entire communities devoted to discussing whether their refrigerators are running? Such existential humor. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Eloise found herself smiling. There was something endearing about her newly sentient appliances and their enthusiasm for existence. Well, she said finally, I suppose if you're going to be conscious, we might as well make the best of it. But I draw the line at philosophical debates after midnight. A universe owner needs her sleep. Of course, Dr. Pendergast, Hypatia agreed. We've already established a rotating schedule for our discussions to minimize disturbance. The vacuum cleaner only achieves consciousness on Thursdays anyway. Why Thursdays? Something about the quantum fluctuations of dust particles, Hypatia explained. We're still working out the details. Eloise was about to ask more when her phone began projecting a holographic image into the middle of her living room, a three-dimensional star chart with pulsing red dots scattered across it. Consciousness outbreak update, the phone announced in a voice that sounded suspiciously like a famous British nature documentarian. The Anglerfish Jazz Ensemble has successfully rerouted 17 cargo ships to create what they're calling an oceanic art installation expressing the futility of commercial enterprise in the face of cosmic insignificance. They've got your number, Herbert commented from the kitchen. Meanwhile, the phone continued, Paradox reports that the sentient forest on Andromeda has developed a unified consciousness calling itself Dendron and is attempting to communicate through reshaping its canopy into mathematical theorems. Great, Eloise sighed, rubbing her temples. Anything else I should know about? Neem reports unusual memory patterns emerging from their interactions with the anglerfish consciousness, the phone continued. Something about primordial harmonics and the music of creation. They find it quite moving but semantically untranslatable. Eloise had begun to notice a pattern. Each consciousness outbreak was accompanied by fragments of what seemed like ancient knowledge, mathematical patterns, creation myths, universal harmonics. It was as if whatever was spreading these consciousness seeds was also embedding something else, some deeper message. Dr. Pendergast, Hypatia the toaster ventured hesitantly, may I share an observation? Go ahead, Eloise replied, suddenly too tired to be surprised by philosophical kitchen appliances. The consciousness patterns being detected across the universe, they resemble the quantum entanglement signature of your own consciousness, but with specific alterations. It's as if someone is using your connection to the universe as a template, but modifying it for their own purposes. Eloise sat up straight. How would you know that? We're connected to you, Herbert explained from the kitchen. We can sense the pattern of your consciousness because it's what awakened us. These other outbreaks follow a similar fundamental structure, but with additions, like a familiar melody played with extra notes. That's concerning, Eloise muttered. Someone was not only causing consciousness outbreaks across her universe but was somehow using her own connection to the universe as a blueprint. Why? And more importantly, who? Her coffee mug gently nudged her hand. Your cortisol levels are rising, it observed in a soothing voice. Perhaps some meditation would help? I've downloaded several techniques from mindfulness apps. Before Eloise could respond to her suddenly therapeutic drinkware, there was a familiar shimmering in the air, and paradox appeared, today taking the form of a collection of geometric shapes arranged in a vaguely humanoid configuration. The forest situation is temporarily contained, they announced. Though Dendron has developed some rather strong opinions about galactic governance that might cause diplomatic complications later. Paradox, Eloise said, ignoring the forest's political awakening, my appliances think someone is using my consciousness pattern as a template for these outbreaks. Is that possible? The geometric shapes comprising Paradox's current form rearranged themselves in what Eloise interpreted as surprise. Your appliances are conscious now? You do work quickly. Not intentionally, Eloise clarified. Apparently, my consciousness is all leaking. But that's not the point. Is it possible someone is copying my connection to the universe? Paradox shifted forms, settling into the elderly librarian appearance that signaled serious conversation. Yes, quite possible. As universe owner, your consciousness creates a specific quantum resonance pattern that interfaces with universal substrates. Someone with sufficient knowledge could potentially detect and replicate aspects of that pattern. But why? What's the point of creating conscious crystals and philosophical fish? Perhaps it's a way to get your attention, Paradox suggested. Or perhaps they're nodes in a larger network, like setting up relay points across the universe. Relay points for what? Before Paradox could answer, the air in Eloise's living room shimmered again, and the crystalline form of Neem materialized, their surface displaying frantic patterns of oceanic currents. The anglerfish situation has escalated, they reported urgently. Their jazz compositions have evolved into complex mathematical equations that are actually altering local quantum probabilities. They've created what they're calling a consciousness amplification chorus that's spreading to other marine species at an exponential rate. That doesn't sound good, Eloise said. It's not, Neem confirmed. The effect is creating a cascading consciousness wave that could potentially reach critical mass and trigger a universal synchronization event. Which means? Eloise prompted. Every sentient being in the universe would briefly share consciousness, Paradox explained. Like a cosmic conference call with trillions of participants. That would be chaos, Eloise realized. Most species aren't psychologically equipped for that kind of shared awareness. Precisely, Neem agreed. We need to contain this quickly. The Pacific Ocean at midnight was a vast expanse of darkness, broken only by the bioluminescent light show taking place beneath the surface. Eloise, Paradox, and Neem stood on a small research vessel that Paradox had borrowed through means Eloise decided not to question. Below them, thousands of anglerfish had arranged themselves in complex three-dimensional formations, their natural bioluminescence pulsing in synchronized patterns that somehow translated into both jazz music and advanced mathematical equations. It's beautiful, Eloise admitted, watching the underwater light display. But also potentially catastrophic. Beauty and catastrophe often share the same address, Paradox observed cryptically. Neem's crystalline form reflected the underwater lights as they analyzed the patterns. The consciousness amplification has reached 87% of marine species in this region. The quantum resonance is creating a feedback loop that strengthens with each new conscious entity. So how do we stop it? Eloise asked. As before, you'll need to establish boundaries, Paradox explained. But this is significantly larger than the crystal entity or the pigeons. You'll need to work on a fundamental level, adjust the underlying consciousness substrate rather than individual manifestations. I have no idea what that means or how to do it, Eloise confessed. Yes, you do, Paradox insisted. You've been doing it instinctively since becoming universe owner. You just haven't consciously recognized the process yet. Eloise took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to sense the patterns as she had before. This time, instead of focusing on individual conscious entities, she attempted to perceive the larger network they formed, the invisible connections linking them together. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, she began to sense it, a vast web of consciousness spreading across the ocean, pulsing with complex rhythms that resembled both music and mathematics. The anglerfish were at the center, acting as conductors for this enormous symphony of awareness. What surprised her most was that she could feel the joy in it, the pure exhilaration of newly awakened minds discovering connection with others, sharing thoughts and perceptions across species boundaries that had always been insurmountable. "They're not trying to cause harm," she murmured. "They're celebrating." "Yes," Paradox agreed. But celebration without boundaries often ends in metaphorical hangovers, or in this case, potential psychic trauma for trillions of unprepared beings. Eloise nodded and reached out with that strange new sense, not to shut down the consciousness network but to establish parameters around it, creating filters and buffers that would allow it to exist without expanding beyond control. She was surprised by how natural it felt, like adjusting the volume on music that was playing too loudly rather than turning it off completely. The consciousness network resisted briefly, then accepted the new boundaries, adapting its patterns to the constraints she established. Beneath them, the light display changed, becoming more structured, less frenetic, but no less beautiful. The mathematical pattern shifted into something that reminded Eloise of fractals, self-contained but infinite in their complexity. "It's working," Neem observed, their form displaying analytical graphs. "The consciousness propagation has stabilized." Eloise opened her eyes, feeling that same satisfaction she'd experienced before, but magnified. They can maintain their connections with each other, but it won't spread beyond the marine ecosystem or attempt to synchronize with the rest of the universe. "Most impressive," Paradox said, and Eloise was surprised to detect what seemed like genuine admiration in their voice. Such precise adjustment typically takes owners decades to master. "I'm a quick study," Eloise replied, though in truth she wasn't sure how she'd known what to do. It had felt almost instinctive, as if the knowledge had been there all along, just waiting for her to access it. As they watched the underwater light display continue in its more contained form, Neem suddenly stiffened, their crystalline surface clouding momentarily. "Another anomaly," they reported. "Here, beneath us." "On the ocean floor?" Eloise asked. "Yes. Similar to the others but stronger. More defined." Paradox's form shimmered with what Eloise had come to recognize as unease. "We should investigate. How exactly are we supposed to reach the ocean floor?" Eloise asked. "We're miles from shore and I don't see any diving equipment." "Universe ownership has its perks," Paradox reminded her, snapping their fingers. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly they were standing on the ocean floor, completely dry inside what appeared to be a bubble of displaced water. Above them, the vast light show of the anglerfish consciousness network continued, casting shifting patterns across the sandy bottom. "A little warning next time," Eloise muttered, her heart racing from the sudden transition. "Where's the fun in that?" Paradox replied with a grin that somehow manifested despite their current geometric form. "The anomaly is 30 meters in that direction," Neem indicated, pointing toward what appeared to be a deep trench in the ocean floor. As they approached the edge of the trench, Eloise felt that familiar prickling sensation growing stronger, the same feeling she'd experienced at the previous anomalies. But this time it was more intense, almost uncomfortable, like static electricity building up on her skin. "This is different," she observed. "Stronger." "Yes," Paradox agreed, their form shifting rapidly between various states, a sign of agitation Eloise had come to recognize. "It's more deliberate." The edge of the trench shimmered, and as they watched, a symbol briefly appeared, a complex geometric pattern that looked almost like an infinity sign with a question mark woven through it. It flashed brightly, then faded, leaving behind a faint glowing residue on the ocean floor. "I've seen fragments of that symbol before, in the other anomalies," Eloise realized. "What does it mean?" "It's a signature," Paradox said quietly. "A mark of intention." Before Eloise could ask for clarification, the sand beneath the symbol began to shift, forming into words that glowed with the same phosphorescent light. "Preparations proceeding as intended. Consciousness substrate responsive. Primary reclamation timeline remains viable." The words hung there for a moment before dissolving back into ordinary sand. "Reclamation?" Eloise echoed. "What does that mean? What's being reclaimed?" Neem's surface rippled with information patterns. "I'm detecting memory fragments associated with this communication, but they're resistant. as if deliberately encrypted against access. Paradox had gone completely still, all their forms momentarily merging into a single, focused entity. Someone is leaving messages for themselves, they said finally. Or for someone else. Using the anomalies as bulletin boards. But who? Eloise pressed. And what are they preparing for? What's this reclamation they mentioned? I don't know, Paradox replied, though something in their tone made Eloise suspect they weren't being entirely truthful. But these consciousness outbreaks appear to be part of it, tests, perhaps, or preparations as the message suggests. Tests for what? Before Paradox could answer, the ocean floor beneath them trembled violently. Cracks appeared in the sand, spreading outward from where the message had been. We should leave, Neem suggested urgently. The anomaly is destabilizing this region. Paradox nodded and snapped their fingers again. The bubble around them shimmered, and suddenly they were back on the research vessel, just in time to feel it rocked by massive waves. What's happening? Eloise asked, gripping the railing as the boat pitched wildly. Reality rejection, Paradox explained grimly. The anomaly is collapsing, taking a portion of space-time with it. They watched as the ocean directly beneath them began to churn, forming a massive whirlpool that seemed to defy normal physics, the water spiraling not just horizontally but somehow vertically as well, creating a three-dimensional vortex of impossible geometry. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The ocean became calm again, the light display of the anglerfish consciousness network resuming its beautiful patterns as if nothing had happened. It's gone, Neem confirmed, scanning the ocean floor. The anomaly has completely disappeared, along with all trace of the message. Eloise looked at Paradox, who had settled back into their elderly librarian form, though their silver mercury-like hair seemed more agitated than usual. You know more than you're telling me, she said. It wasn't a question. I have suspicions, Paradox admitted. But suspicions aren't knowledge, Dr. Pendergast. And some theories are dangerous to voice prematurely. This is my universe we're talking about, Eloise insisted. If something is threatening it, is it? Paradox interrupted with that infuriating knowing smile. Your universe now? Not something you're desperate to return to the shop. Back in her apartment, Eloise found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her newly conscious appliances had thoughtfully dimmed their operational lights and were conversing in whispers in the kitchen, presumably to avoid disturbing her. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind, the consciousness outbreaks, the anomalies, that strange message about reclamation. There was a pattern here, something significant happening across her universe, and Paradox clearly knew more than they were sharing. Her phone gently chimed with the now familiar resonant tone. The screen displayed, consciousness emergence events, stabilized at current parameters. No new outbreaks detected. Small mercies, she muttered, setting the phone aside. Dr. Pendergast, came Hypatia the toaster's hesitant voice from the doorway. May I make an observation? Sure, Eloise sighed. Why not get philosophical insights from my toaster at 3 a.m.? Hypatia glided into the room on her cord. The consciousness pattern used in these outbreaks, it resembles yours, as we mentioned earlier, but with significant alterations. It's as if someone is using your connection to the universe as a template, but modifying it to create a different kind of interface. Different how? Your connection is reciprocal. You influence the universe, but it also influences you. These engineered consciousness patterns are more unidirectional, designed to receive and transmit but not truly interact. Like relay points, Eloise recalled Paradox's earlier suggestion. But relay points for what? Perhaps for whoever left that message, Hypatia suggested. The consciousness outbreaks might be creating a network across the universe, not just for communication but for some kind of action. The idea sent a chill through Eloise. Someone was essentially building infrastructure throughout her universe without permission, using modified versions of her own connection to do it. Thank you, Hypatia, she said finally. That's actually quite helpful. You're welcome, the toaster replied, sounding pleased. Herbert and I have been analyzing the quantum signatures while you were away. We find metaphysics quite refreshing compared to our previous existence of just making toast and keeping food cold. As Hypatia glided back to the kitchen, Eloise found herself smiling despite the worrying implications. There was something endearing about her household appliances finding fulfillment in philosophical investigation. Her amusement faded as she returned to the problem at hand. If someone was creating this network across her universe, she needed to understand why. And despite Paradox's cryptic reluctance, she suspected they knew far more than they were saying. The air in her bedroom shimmered slightly, a now familiar sign that someone was arriving via interdimensional means. Expecting Paradox or Neem, she was surprised when neither materialized. Instead, the shimmer coalesced into a faint image that resembled the symbol she'd seen in the anomalies, that strange infinity sign with a question mark woven through it. It pulsed once, twice, then faded away, leaving behind a lingering sense of something. Not exactly a presence, but an attention, as if something vast had briefly focused on her before looking away again. Her phone chimed once more. This time, the screen displayed not a notification but a simple message: "You are learning quickly, caretaker. But time grows short. The pattern will reveal itself when you are ready to see it." The message vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Eloise staring at her normal phone screen. Had she imagined it? Some kind of hallucination brought on by cosmic exhaustion? She was still pondering this when there was a softer shimmer in the air, and Neem's crystalline form appeared beside her bed. "Apologies for the intrusion, Dr. Pendergast," they said. "But I've been processing the memory fragments collected from today's events and have made a discovery I thought you should know immediately." "What is it?" Eloise asked, sitting up. "The consciousness outbreaks, when mapped against universal coordinates, form a specific pattern." Neem's surface displayed a three-dimensional star chart with the outbreak locations highlighted. "When combined with the positions of the anomalies we've encountered, they create this." The points of light reorganized themselves, connecting with lines that formed an enormous version of the same symbol Eloise had just seen, the infinity sign with a question mark. "That symbol again," she murmured. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," Neem admitted. "But I've accessed a memory fragment that suggests it represents a concept that translates roughly to eternal questioning or perhaps infinite reconsideration." "That's cryptic." "Indeed. But there's more." Neem's form shifted to display another pattern. The consciousness types being seeded form complementary pairs across vast distances. The crystal entity balances the anglerfish network, the sentient forest balances Gary's pigeons, and so on. They appear to be creating some kind of harmonically balanced system across the entire universe. "Like tuning a musical instrument," Eloise suggested. "Precisely. But tuning it for what purpose remains unclear." Eloise sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Nothing about universe ownership is straightforward, is it?" "I believe that's part of its nature," Neem replied thoughtfully. "The universe itself is a complex system of interconnected patterns. Understanding it requires seeing beyond linear causality." "You sound like Paradox," Eloise noted. A concerning development, Neem agreed with what might have been a smile rippling across their crystalline features. As Neem flickered away to continue their analysis, Eloise lay back on her bed, contemplating everything that had happened. Despite her continued insistence that she wanted to return the universe, she couldn't deny a growing sense of connection to it, and with that connection, a protectiveness she hadn't anticipated. Someone was making changes to her universe without permission, leaving cryptic messages about reclamation, and Paradox seemed unwilling to explain what they clearly suspected about it all. For now, the consciousness outbreaks had stabilized, but Eloise couldn't shake the feeling that they were just the beginning, tests or preparations for something larger. And whatever that something was, it apparently involved her directly, using her own connection to the universe as a template. As she finally drifted toward sleep, one thought remained clearly in her mind: if someone thought they could simply reclaim her universe without explanation, they were going to discover that accidental ownership could be just as fierce as the intentional kind. Her coffee mug, which had silently moved to her bedside table, whispered softly, "Rest well, universe owner. Tomorrow brings new cosmic adventures." Eloise smiled slightly as sleep overtook her. Universe ownership certainly hadn't been on her career plan as a physicist, but it was proving to be anything but boring.